With all the outreach, we still have men come forward for help saying, I don't know if I can do this. What if somebody finds out? Part of the problem is that for both men and women, when they're molested or raped, the guilt, the shame, the blame all falls on them unjustifiably. So they feel like they have something they must know. And if the truth be known, they might lose their job, they might lose their family, their friends, nobody will want anything to do with them. How can they come forward and speak up? And so a big part of our job right from the very beginning is to let them know that first, help is available, and second of all, that help is confidential, and that it's a helpful thing for them and society for them to speak up, and for them to confront the abuser. Well, how do you confront an abuser? Do I have to go talk to them? What if my dad, my mother, my uncle is an old person now? It'll just kill them if I talk to them. There's so many issues about confronting that they fear, and allow those fears to keep them from getting the help they need. So we have to debunk those myths too. First thing, confrontation does not have to be face-to-face. People wonder, how am I going to confront somebody if they're dead? Well, you can confront somebody if they're dead the same way you can confront somebody if they're alive. However, you don't know where they are, or you don't want to talk to them yourself. Part of that is get help. Usually child molesters want nothing more than to see their victim suffer, for them to continue in silence. And if a person comes forward and gets help and feels good about themselves, goes on to have good relationships, healthy relationships, feels successful in life, then that is a slap in the face for the child molester or pedophile, and that is a way of speaking up. Sometimes people can do this by appearing in our documentary or some kind of film project, going on TV and saying, I was molested by this person or that person when I was a kid, and I want them to know we're coming after you. In your face confrontation. Sometimes they'll make a phone call. Sometimes they'll write a letter. More subtle ways, though, is they'll participate in some kind of event that we have. Maybe they'll go to a classroom or a college class where they're learning about sexuality, and they'll talk about what it's like to be a male who's been sexually victimized. Very, very helpful for the students in the class, and very healing for the victim survivor to do so. We used to have a shoe exhibit here in Monterey County where every year we would find a grassy knoll, maybe in front of the courtyard, or maybe out by the lake, or in front of a classroom at a university. And what we would do is we would put on the lawn a pair of shoes for every person who had been sexually molested or raped in Monterey County, as far as we knew. Everyone that had been reported to the police. One man confronted his abuse by going to his employment and saying, I'm part of a shoe drive. He didn't want to say what for. I'm collecting old shoes. And he brought in 100 pairs of old shoes. That was very empowering to him. So they need to know that it is helpful to speak up. And what is typically the case? Well, if we look at me, I've spoken up about this subject to educate people, getting in front of the camera over and over again, in front of crowds, talking to reporters, and I have yet to ever have somebody challenge the stories that have been written up or done about the work we do. This is not a debatable issue. People are molested, people are raped, we provide services, we help them, and everybody understands that. So there is no challenge to it. And typically when somebody comes forward and says, I was molested as a child, or I was raped, or this happened to me, what they get is they get support, they get sympathy, they get help, they get love, they can get compassion. However, there is a risk. So if we go back to the school, well, if we at the Rape Crisis Center send in one of our staff to educate kids in the elementary school down the street this week, and they go into Mrs. Jones's class and talk about child molestation, and Mrs. Jones starts to cry and after the person from the Rape Crisis Center leaves, the kids say, "Oh, Miss Jones, what's wrong?" And she'll say, "I'm sorry, kids, but that presentation reminded me I was molested when I was a kid, and oh, it hurts." The next day, Mrs. Jones is likely to get calls and cards from the parents, maybe little gifts, saying, "Thank you so much for sharing. We feel so sorry for you. We hope you heal." Well, the same day, our worker goes into the class next door, and instead of talking to Mrs. Jones's class, they talk to Mr. Sanchez's class. And the same thing happens. At the end, Mr. Sanchez is crying, and the kids come forward. "Why are you crying, Mr. Sanchez?" "Well, when I was molested, when I was a kid, I was molested, and this reminded me of it." The next day, Mr. Sanchez will not get gifts, will not get supportive calls, will not get supportive notes. He will get called into the principal's office and told that he's lost his classroom because the principal received tons of phone calls from the parents saying, "I want my kid out of this man's class. He's going to molest my kid because he said he was molested." So there are risks. Unfortunately, men do face some challenges still. However, we can't break down those challenges unless people come forward. And again, over and over again, those who come forward help move this along. The shame, the blame, the guilt does not belong on the victim survivor. It belongs on the perpetrator, and it needs to be put back there. One of the men from our documentary Boyhood Shadows is a Hispanic man who broke cultural myths and cultural norms. In the Hispanic culture, first thing, the myth is it doesn't happen. Second of all, if it does, you just man up. You be tough. You be rough. Get over it. Don't talk about it. And certainly don't report it to anybody. And he came forward and spoke up. So we have yet to see, because the film is not out for general release yet, we have yet to see what's going to happen to this man. However, he is convinced that whether it is a blip in the system, nobody notices, or people applaud him, or if gangs come after him and take him out because he's broken those cultural norms, it was worth it because he had to do it. And he's doing it not only for himself, but for all the other Hispanic men out there who are suffering. Sexual abuse occurs across all racial lines, across all nationalities, and there are people out there who need to know it's okay to come forward and speak up.